Welcome to this week's Parsha Shiur, Parsha's Vaeira. I have three ideas to share with you. If you're listening online, please email me at j.golker@gmail.com. The first idea is goes to one of the centerpieces of this week's Parsha. Namely, you've got the 7 makas, and one of the most difficult themes is the fact that HaKadosh Baruch Hu hardens the heart of Paro. Now, last year, we went through 3 mahalchim. How could it be? How could it be that HaKadosh Baruch Hu hardens Paro's heart and takes away his free will? Free will is an axiom of our faith, it's one of the fundamentals, and therefore there's a challenge, conceptually, theologically. In Hashkafa, how could it be that HaKadosh Baruch Hu takes away Paro's Bechira? So last year I presented 3 mahalchim, Rashi, the Rambam, and the Sefarno. Today I'd like to share a 4th. I'll quickly review the other 3. I won't do it inside, but I've got it on the source sheet. If you're listening, please do email me and I'll send you the handout, j.golker@gmail.com. And if you want me to, if you want to go through the actual sources, I did that last year in 2025, in last year's Parsha Shiur, so you're welcome to go and find that on Torah Anytime or wherever. So, but let me just remind you what the 3 mahalchim are. The first is Rashi. Again, the question is, how could HaKadosh Baruch Hu harden Paro's heart? Surely that takes away his Bechira, which is an axiom of our faith, one of the fundamentals. So Rashi says, ultimately, that hardening Paro's heart in the last 5 of the Makkos was a punishment for the first 5, when it was Paro's own obstinacy that led him to refuse to let Klal Yisrael go. So the second 5 was a punishment for the first 5. That's how Rashi learns. The Rambam famously says that free will is a gift. Having the opportunity to make the right choices in life is a gift from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And you either use it or you lose it. If a person abuses that gift, then it's taken away from you. The example that I gave last year was the sort of dramatic moshel. Imagine a young man, Rachmana litzlan, shoots his own parents. The police come along, he's put behind bars, and then the day comes for his trial, where they're going to decide what sentence to give him. And as he's hauled in front of the judge looks down on him and says, "Do you have anything to say in defense? Are there any mitigating factors?" And the kid looks up at the judge and says, "Yes, please have mercy on me because I'm an orphan." Well, that's ridiculous. He made himself into an orphan. He made himself into a yosem. So how can you use that as a defense? Well, so too the Rambam says, it's in Hilchos Tshuva, Perek Vav, Halacha Gimel, the Rambam says that free will is a gift, and he uses Paro as an illustration. Since he abused that gift by making consistently the wrong choices, therefore he lost it. The Sefarno gives a third reason, a very beautiful reason, and he sort of twisted it all on its head and said, on the contrary, HaKadosh Baruch Hu hardened Paro's heart in order to give him free will. Because any normal person wouldn't be able to withstand the makas that were being showered down on Paro, and in order to give him the choice to say yes or to say no, HaKadosh Baruch Hu had to harden his heart. So therefore his heart was hardened in order to give him free will. And I mentioned last year a wonderful insight by Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, former chief rabbi here in the UK. He said a beautiful idea. He noted that there are 3 different expressions used in the Pasuk and the Psukim in this week's Edra, and each one relates or supports one of the 3 mahalchim, one of the 3 approaches that I just mentioned. So, for example, the Pasuk says in Perek Zayin, "Vani akshe es leiv Paro," I will harden Paro's heart. That seems to support Rashi, that Paro was hard on Klal Yisrael, so HaKadosh Baruch Hu was hard on him. It was a punishment for not listening for being obstinate in the first 5. The second reference is in Perek Ches, "V'hachbeid es libo." The first lashon is akshe, lashon of kosher, but the second one is "V'hachbeid es libo," which seems to support the Rambam, says Rabbi Sachs, because Paro's heart was heavy, it lacked energy and or the strength to repent. And therefore, that seems to be what the Rambam is saying, that it's a gift and you either use it or lose it. And then the last one, the expression is not akshe or hachbeid, but vayachazek es leiv Paro. He strengthened his heart. That seems to support the Sefarno, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu strengthened Paro's heart to give him free will. Okay, that was really a summary of last year's Shiur. And what I want to do today is just to suggest a fourth mahalach. And this is something I saw in the writings of the Chofetz Chaim, which addresses this question, which is a fascinating take. Says the Chofetz Chaim, and this is now the bottom paragraph of the page. Says the Chofetz Chaim, it's Chofetz Chaim ala Torah. V'anyakshe eslev paroi, v'rabu shalim eich zeh nenaloi b'fnei paroi dalsis hatshuva. How could it be? Many ask that HaKadosh Baruch Hu closes the doors of tshuva on Paro. Halo derech klal shari tshuva einim ninolim. Surely the gates of repentance are never closed. So how could HaKadosh Baruch Hu do this to Paro? Afilu l'chayta yosagol, even the greatest sinner, he always has the possibility, surely, to do tshuva. Elo ha'inyanhu, but the idea is this. Ki yeshlam chaytin shemin hashamayim oizrim lohem lachzor b'tshuva. There are those sinners that from heaven, they get help, they get assistance to do tshuva. Kamosh anim mispalim. If you think about it, that's what we daven when we say, "Hachazirenu b'tshuva shlema lefanecha." We've done things wrong, and we say to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, "Please, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, give us siyata d'shmaya, give us the opportunity to do tshuva." Hachazirenu b'tshuva shlema lefanecha. V'yesh chaytim, and there are those people who sin, shehigdishu es hasor, they sort of pile up their sins so high, ad kadei kach shenishlo mehem hasiyua min hasiyua, that siyata d'shmaya to do tshuva is taken away from them. U'min hashamayim lo ya'azru lohem, and they won't get any heavenly help to do tshuva. V'rak aleihem lis'oire me'atzmum la'asas tshuva, and therefore it's got to come from themselves, because HaKadosh Baruch Hu won't assist. HaKadosh Baruch Hu amal Moshe, HaKadosh Baruch Hu therefore says to Moshe Rabbeinu, Leich v'hidia leParoi, you go tell Paroi, shehirchik lekas b'rishosoi, he has distanced himself so badly by his very negative choices. V'yei onish min hashamayim, and he's going to be punished from heaven. Shelo yazu lo lachzu b'tshuva, that he won't get any help, he won't get any siyata d'shmaya in doing tshuva. Ki ani ichbadti es liboy achshav koved, now his heart is heavy. Ki min hashamayim lo yisayeu biyodei, that from heaven they're not going to assist him in any way. Aval lo nilkecha mimenu habechira lachzu b'atzim b'tshuva, but fundamentally he does have the ability to do tshuva. We're not taking away from him the opportunity, the ability to do tshuva. So therefore, says the Chofetz Chaim, answering our question, of course he still has the option to do tshuva. It's just that he's not going to get siyata d'shmaya, heavenly help to do so. And he concludes, if you look at the last paragraph, V'zu ha'isa ta'usu shel Elisha ben Avuya. This was the mistake of the famous Elisha ben Avuya, otherwise known as Acher in the Gemara. K'sheshama Baskol. Remember, he was one of the great Tanoim, the teacher of Rabbi Vaeira, and he sadly left Yiddishkeit. And when he heard the Baskol, Shuvu bonim shovim chutz me'acher, they tried to encourage him. The Gemara describes various ways, in Chagiga, I think, in Chagiga, I think it is, they tried many ways to try and bring him back to do tshuva, and they weren't successful, because Elisha heard a Baskol which said, Shuvu bonim shovim chutz me'acher, return all wayward children, everyone can do tshuva, chutz me'acher, apart from acher. So he understood it literally, that he will never be able to do tshuva. He didn't realize that his free will was not taken away from him to do tshuva himself. All it was saying is that from heaven they were not going to help him. So the Chofetz Chaim addresses the question and answers it very beautifully, and says that of course Paro and anybody else has the option always to do tshuva. The gates of tshuva are never closed. But sometimes a person can lose the siyata d'shmaya that is sometimes given to others to help him do tshuva. That's how the Chofetz Chaim addresses that question. Okay, there we have it. Okay, let's move on. Now, the next two pieces, I'm back to the Beis Av. I looked into this over Shabbos and came across two very beautiful pieces from the Beis Av, who I've been quoting of late, Rabbi Yochum Schlesinger. He should live and be well. He's Baruch Hashem in his 2nd century already, a Rosh Shiva here in Stamford Hill in London. And really some beautiful pieces in his Sefer Beis Av. Now, the first one I'm going to deal with is the second of the 7 makkahs that appear in this week's Sedra, the Tzfardeya. Take a look at the second box on the second page. The frogs are going to go everywhere. In your homes, in your bedrooms, it's going to go into your ovens, into your kneading troughs. They're going to get everywhere. Now, says Reb Schlesinger, there is a machlokus in Sanhedrin. We know that the whole makkah began with one frog. It's in the singular in the pasuk, And therefore, the Gemara's or Chazal understood that to mean there was one frog. But the question is, how did it become many? So there's a Machlokes Tanoim in the Gemara in Sanhedrin, Samach Zayin Amud Beis. Rabbi Kiva Omer, Tzfardea achas hoisa v'hishritza. There was one tzfardea, and miraculously it's proliferated and swarmed into many, many frogs. Amalei Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah. So the Gemara says there, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah said to his colleague, Akiva, malacho etzel haggadah, why are you dabbling in agadata? Leichel negoyim v'olos. You should go back to halacha, to the very complicated halachas of Tumah and Tahara. That's your area of expertise. Stick with that. Why? Because I don't agree with your take on this. Tzvadea achas hoisa. It was one regular frog. V'shar kalohem, and it croaked loudly, and that sort of encouraged other frogs to head over to Egypt. V'him bo. That's the machlekes there. Rabbi Kiva, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah. Rabbi Kiva says there was one frog, and it sort of miraculously became many. As we know, Chazal tell us, perhaps, they hit the frog, and then it splits, and every time they hit it, it splits again, and then you've got thousands of people hitting the frog, and it keeps splitting and replicating. But it was all miraculous. That's the point. According to Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, nothing miraculous. The frog just croaked, and loads of frogs headed over. Nothing miraculous about that. That's the Gemara in Sanhedrin. Ubiyah b'chasm sofa. So it says Rav Schlesinger, the chasm sofa explains the machlokes as follows. The Tainas Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, hoysal pia Gemara Pesachim nun gimel. Because the svara, the taina, the objection of Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah against Rabbi Kiva was based on a Gemara in Pesachim daf nun gimel. What's that? To Chananya, Mishael, v'Azariah mosru atzmam lomus al kedushas Hashem. We know that the three greats, Chananya, Mishael, and Azariah, they were moise nefesh to die al kiddush Hashem, to throw themselves into the furnace, based on the Sfardeya, shenosu kal v'chomim and Sfardim, because they made a kal v'chomim from the actions of the frogs in this week's Parsha. Ma Sfardim she'enam mitzuvim, they're not obligated, they're not commanded to keep Torah and mitzvahs, and yet they were moise nefesh to give up their lives to serve HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Odnu alachas kama v'kama, how much more so should we do the same? That was the svara, the kal v'chomim, says the Gemara in Pesachim, of Chananya, Mishael, and Azariah. V'hashta, says the Chasm Sofer. Alibet Rabbi Kiva, according to Rabbi Kiva, the brias sfardim halolu hoybenes, that the creation of the tzfardeya was all miraculous. She'achas hishritza rabim, that one became many. Imkein kol briusim latachlis makazu. Therefore, their whole creation was for this end, to be moise nefesh and to proliferate throughout Egypt, and to go into their bedrooms and into their beds and into their ovens and their kneading troughs. Vimkein, nivru l'tachlis hamasiris nefesh, they were born, they were created to be moise nefesh lihisorif hakudushas Hashem. That was their raison d'etre. Umar raya lechananya v'chaverov, and therefore what was the raya for Chananya and Mishael and Azariah? Shemitzuvim b'chol mitzvahs haTorah v'chai bohem. Because Chananya, Mishael and Azariah were not created to die, they were created to live, as the Pasuk says, v'chai bohem. So minayin lohem lilmoid mizeh limsor nafsham lomus al kedushas Hashem. How could they therefore make a kal v'chomer to say that just like the frogs who are not mitzvah have chosen to die, how much more so ourselves? But that's not true, because you, Chananya, Mishael, and Azariah, have got a mitzvah v'chai bohem. You should be alive. You should serve HaKadosh Baruch Hu living, not through dying. And therefore Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah did not accept Rabbi Kiva's explanation and said it was not miraculous. They were not created to be moise nefesh to die. It was through natural means, as it were, and the frog just croaked and others came and joined. They were stam frogs. They were there also. They were frogs who were created to live and not to die, but they chose to die, and therefore the svara, the kal v'chomer of Chananya, Mishael, and Azariah made a lot of sense. Because despite the fact they were born to live and not to die, they chose to die. Beautiful. So the Chasam Sofer explains that the machlokes Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah and Rabbi Kiva is this. Rabbi Kiva says it was all miraculous, one frog became many. Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah says, no, Akiva, lechetz l'haggadah, what are you doing with Agadata? Go back to Negoim and Alos, I don't accept your interpretation. There was one Sfardeya, It croaked and encouraged others to come. All natural, no miracles over there. What's the depth of the machlokes? Says the Chasam Sofer, because, says Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, I can't accept your idea, Rabbi Kiva, because of the kal v'chomer of Hanan Mishal and Azariah. The Gemara in Pesachim says, Hanan Mishal and Azariah made a kal v'chomer. If the frogs who are not mitzuva in mitzvahs chose to be Moshe Nefesh and die al Kiddush Hashem by jumping into the ovens, etc. Well, how much more so us, where we are mitzuva in Torah mitzvahs, and how much more so we should be Moshe Nefesh. But if the creation of these frogs was only to be Moshe Nefesh, then there's a pircha to the Kal V'chomer, because Hanan, Mishal, and Azariah were created to live v'chai bohem. So therefore, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah concludes that it was all natural, no miracles, and the frogs simply croaked, encouraged others to come along. They were born, these frogs, to live and not to die, and therefore the Kal V'chomer of Hanan, Mishal, and Azariah could stand and makes much more sense. Good. Adds Rabbi Schlesinger, beautiful postscript, last paragraph. V'nire, sheyesh lahosif b'zeh lehovin das Rabbi Kiva, v'hakbodos shel Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah. I can add another dimension. The Rabbi Kiva, be'emes l'shitosei. This is Rabbi Kiva l'shitosei. How so? Shesvir lei be'brachas samach aleph. He holds famously in the end of brachas, b'chol nafshecha, that a person has got to give up his life to serve HaKadosh Baruch Hu. V'chein osa maisa, and that was actually what happened to Rabbi Kiva. That was his end. Kasho yusarkim b'saro, when they tragically combed his flesh from the skin off his flesh. Omru talmidov ad kan. The Talmidim says, Rebbe, this is your fate. Omelei kol yomai, and Rabbi Kiva famously responded and said, Kol yomai hisim mitzvayim mosa yove posuk zel liyodi v'akaymena. Well, when is this day going to happen? When am I going to get to the point where I can fulfill the mitzvah of B'chol Nafshecha? Hari, the Sfir Lu, says Rabbi Schlesinger, that Rabbi Kiva was of the opinion, Shetachlis Brias Ha'odam Hu, Sheyagia L'Deikach Lomos Al Kiddush Hashem. The epitome that a person can achieve is to die Al Kiddush Hashem. And Rabbi Kiva was longing to fulfill that high point that any human being can achieve. And therefore, the Kal V'chomer, the Hanan and Mishal and Azariah, made a lot of sense. That just like the frogs were created solely to be Moshe Nefesh, to die al Kiddush Hashem, well, so too human beings are also created ultimately, the ultimate epitome of their existence here is to die al Kiddush Hashem, if they can achieve that very lofty level. And therefore the Kal V'chomer is a very worthy Kal V'chomer. Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah hikbid al adova. Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah objected. You're right. If things happen and that comes your way, then a person is obligated to be Moshe Nefesh. That's clear. But the real tachlis of a Jew is not to die, but to live al Kiddush Hashem. And to live a life of Torah and mitzvahs. And he was arguing on this point. Very beautiful postscript. In other words, Rabbi Schlesinger is saying that what's really the root of the machlekas? The root of the machlekas is very fundamental. Rabbi Akiva was of the opinion that the highest point a person can achieve is to die al Kiddush Hashem. And therefore that is really what a person is born to do, and only some have the zuchus to do it. And that's why Rabbi Akiva would say, Mosai when will I be zoichet to fulfill the mitzvah, the fulfillment of the pasuk of B'chol Nafshecha? Says Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, no, that's not the high point. The high point is v'chai bohem, that better than dying al Kiddush Hashem is living al Kiddush Hashem, and that's why he objected to Rabbi Akiva's take, because the Kal V'chomer wouldn't stand, as explained. Okay, that's a very beautiful piece in the Beis Av, really a very gorgeous piece. Now let me just finish off with one final idea, and this is to do with the makkah of Orov, of wild animals. In 2021, I checked my notes. I went through this Orov and I presented, I think, 4 or 5 different mahalchim in what are the Orov, what are these wild animals. So here, I just want to mention one of them because it's relevant, and then just also add a postscript of the Beis Av, a very beautiful insight. So the pasuk says, this is paragraph 3 on the sheet, Vayom Hashem el Moshe hashkem b'boker v'syatzav l'fnei Paro. As ever, go and get up early and meet Paro, who was going off to the Nile, pretending to be a god for the rest of the time, but not when he needed to relieve himself. Kimeincho meshalech es ami hini mashliach b'cho v'avodecho v'amcho v'atecho es ha'orev. If you don't let them go, I'm going to send the wild animals. Now, the Chanukas HaTorah, and also they say it in the name of the God, says a very interesting thing, because the Pasuk says HaKadosh Baruch Hu is going to be mashliach es ha'orev, umolu botim Mitzrayim es ha'orev, and the houses of the Egyptians will be filled with wild animals, v'gam ha'adoma shehem oleho, and the land upon which they stand. That seems to be redundant. What on earth does that mean? V'gam ha'adoma shehem oleho, just say, I'm going to send wild animals, and they'll enter your homes and your lands. But why v'gam ha'adoma shehem oleho? What does that mean? So, different interpretations, but there's one beautiful interpretation of the Chanukas HaTorah, Rabbeinu Heschel. Rabbi Heschel was the Rebbe of the Shach and the Taz. I've been to his cave many times. He's buried in the Krakow Beis HaKvaros, not far from the Bach, just a few kvarim away from the Bach, and not far, of course, from the Ramon, the Teis Yontov, and the other greats who are buried there. The Chanukas HaTorah says the following, and they say it b'shem the Gaon as well. Hine, al tevas ha'adom azos nemru harbe perushim. As I said, on the words v'gam ha'adom ha'shehem oleh, there are many explanations. V'yesh levai, tehine, Rashi's al pirish orev kol minei chayes rois. Rashi says, what are orev? Many wild animals. V'hine, isa b'rosh, b'perek ches d'bekilayim, mishnehei. There is a Rash. The Rash is one of the Perushim, commentaries on the Mishnayos in Kilayim, Mishnayos generally, but in Kilayim, Perek Ches Mishnehei. Sheyesh chaya achas sheshmo yidoini. There is one very curious creature, wild animal called the yidoini, u'kumin chevel godel yotzim mishorish sheba'aretz, and it's connected to the ground through some sort of chain. It's like an umbilical cord that connects the baby to the mother. Well, this yidoini, this curious wild animal, is connected to the ground with some sort of chain. And you can't get close to capturing it because it's a wild, vicious animal. The way to get it is you pull the chain that connects it to the ground. As soon as you disconnect it, you cut the cord that connects the animal to the ground, it will die. Here the Pasuk says that all wild animals are going to attack the Mitzrayim. If that's the case, how are you going to get if all wild animals are coming, how are you going to get the Yidoni to get there? Because as soon as it detached itself from its land, from the ground underneath it, it's going to die. So how are you going to get the Yidoni all the way over to Mitzrayim? Because it's connected to the ground through this chain, and if the chain disconnects, it will die. That's why the Pasuk says, i.e., the land which connects this Yidoni to the ground underneath it through this chain, that will come with it, the ground will come with it, so that the Yidoni as well will be able to come and persecute the Mitzrayim. Beautiful. That's the Chanukas HaTorah and the Vilna Gaon. Now, the Beis Av brings that, and then he says the following. V'ula yesh leima. Oid al pi sheyodua. B'chochmas ha'teva. She'achayos b'derech klal. Einam yotzim imigvul gedulam. Says the Beis Av, a different pshat. It's well known that people who have expertise in natural sciences or in the animal world know that generally speaking, animals don't venture out of their habitat. They don't roam the residential areas and roam the streets. They generally stay in their locations, in their habitat. They don't normally go into residential areas. But if you go into their area, then you're going to be attacked. So, you go into the jungle, you go into the safari, so you're going into their territory, you've got to be careful. But generally speaking, when you're walking in the streets, you're not expecting animals to venture into residential built-up areas. Yesh leima, shekan nishtana hagvul shelohem. You know what HaKadosh Baruch Hu did when it came to Orov? He just changed the habitat. Ubizman makas Orov na'asosa admas Mitzrayim gvul chiyusam. He just broadened safari, the jungle, and he just made the whole of Mitzrayim one big safari. That was their natural habitat, and therefore, Valkain bo kabetoich shelohem. It's as if we are in their natural habitat, and therefore we're fair game. They're going to attack us, all the Mitzrayim. Veziku And now we can understand how HaKadosh Baruch Hu protected Klal Yisrael. Because it says, i.e., there's going to be a division between Eretz Goshen and the rest of Mitzrayim. Because when it came to all the other Makkahs, Klal Yisrael, of course, were not affected. Avokan, here we've got a bit of a problem. Because we have to have a physical distinction between Goshen and the rest of Mitzrayim. Because Mitzrayim is now the land, the habitat of the Orov, of the wild animals. And therefore, any Mitzri who is in their habitat is fair game and they're going to be attacked. Masha'enkin Eretz Goshen Nisha Gvul Yishuv. Masha'enkin Goshen is considered residence, a residential area. It's not the territory of the animals, and therefore the animals are not going to attack Goshen, i.e. the Bnei Yisrael who live there. Al Kain Lo Bo'u L'sham. V'zeh she'kosuv kan, and that's Pshat, V'ani Hashem B'keref ha'oretz. Beautiful. That I'm distinguishing between Goshen, that's considered the residential area, and Eretz Mitzrayim, which has now become the sort of expanded habitat of all these wild animals, and that's why the animals are going to attack the Mitzrayim, but not the Bnei Yisrael. Okay, beautiful. So there we have it. So let me just summarize what we've done today. We've had a discussion of hardening Paro's heart. How can we do it? So as I mentioned in last year's shir, the three Mahalchim of Rashi, the Rambam and Sefarno, Rashi says that hardening Paro's heart was just, in the last 5 plagues, was a punishment for the first 5, and that was Rashi's Mahalach. It was as described more last year. The Rambam says that free will is a gift. You either use it or you lose it. And then the Sefarno says Hashem hardened Paro's heart to give him free will, to make him be able to cope and to give him the choice, do I let the people go or not? And Rabbi Jonathan Sachs explains that that he finds support in each of the Mahalchim of Rashi, the Rambam and the Sefarno, in the Lashonis used, whether it's Akshe, Hachbeit, or Vayachazik. Very beautiful insight. And then what we discussed this year really is the Chofetz Chaim. The Chofetz Chaim explains that HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave Paro free will. He obviously had free will because no one ever takes, the doors of tshuva are never shut. The only thing HaKadosh Baruch Hu didn't give him the divine assistance, the siyata d'shmaya, to do tshuva, and that explains Elisha ben Avuya as described. Then we had the beautiful explanation of the Machlekes Rabbi Kiva and Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, whether the proliferation of the frogs was a natural thing, like Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah says, or whether it was a miracle. And based on the Kal V'chomer, as the Chasam Sofer explains, of Hanan and Mishael and Azariah, and the beautiful postscript of the Beis Av, Rabbi Schlesinger, regarding this is Rabbi Kiva's, the whole Machlekes was what is the epitome in life. Is it to die al Kiddush Hashem or to live al Kiddush Hashem? And then the final piece of the Orov, the Chanukah Satorah, with that very creative idea of the Yidoni, the Vilna Gaon I think says the same as well. And then the Beis Av gives another pshat based on the fact that HaKadosh Baruch Hu sort of expanded the natural habitat of the animals so they were free to roam throughout Mitzrayim, and that's why they were able to attack the Mitzrayim. However, in Eretz Goshen, that was a distinction. They didn't go into the residential areas because, generally speaking, wild animals do not go into residential areas. They stick to their own habitat, which became the whole of Mitzrayim, except for Eretz Goshen. Okay, we'll leave it there.